Okay, so today we're covering the functions of the nervous system, which, like I said before, is focusing more on the biological aspect of the concepts that we covered in our last session.
Okay. So, what is the nervous system? The nervous system is the body's communication network, and it enables the body to first gather information and then integrate and process it in the brain, and then finally output with some kind of response. So, specifically for the first function of the input, uh, the sensory receptors, like your eyes, your nose, gather information from the environment and then send it to the brain. And then the brain process the information, like integration, and decides what should be done. And then the decision made by the brain is then sent as a message to the muscles or glands or your part of body. So a simple example is, for example, if you smell like a bad smell with your nose, that's the sensory receptors, and then the brain decides that the body or you don't want to be near it anymore. So it decides that you want to walk away, sends message to the muscles in your leg, and then you walk away from that area. That's like the nervous system functioning. And then a nice simple diagram is shown on the right. The red box, the central nervous system, basically represents the brain and where it all does all the control center and stuff. And then the peripheral nervous system is like uh it includes all the nerves that extend from brain or spinal cord. And these nerves are connected to different muscles and organs for specific functions, which we will talk about it later. And then the nervous system is so important to our body because it regulates like the usual daily function and also the complex mental processes.
Now we will move on to what's the central and peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is the body's main processing center consisting of the brain and the spinal cord. It processes information, it creates signals, and coordinates body activities. The brain is a main command center for complex thoughts, emotions, and actions, while the spinal cord acts as a conduit for signals traveling between the brain and the rest of the body. Some examples is how you like your memory, your decision making, and your movements that you make. For peripheral nervous system, it is the network of nerves that extend throughout the body, connecting the central nervous system to all parts of the body. It relays on sensory information to the central nervous system, transmits signals from central to muscles and glands, and controls involuntary functions like the breathing and digestion. It includes the cranial nerves emerging from the brain and the spinal nerves emerging from the spinal cord. Some examples is the your sensory perceptions, touch, taste, vision, and motor control such as muscle movements and autonomic functions like your heart rate and digestion.
And then next we'll be going over the differences between the autonomic and somatic nervous system. So first, the somatic nervous system involves things that you can consciously sense and do. So this is categorized as voluntary movement. So some of the functions include sensory input. This is how your body processes sensory information that comes from external stimuli, so from the outside, and then it travels to the brain. And a fun fact is that sight is the only sense that doesn't get processed this way because the retina and optic nerve connect directly to the brain. Another function is movement control. So the somatic nervous system controls all voluntary movement, as we've said, and then once the sensory information has been sent to the brain, it's integrated, and then an appropriate response is determined, and then the response is then sent through the somatic nervous system so that it can reach the muscles and make them move. So later on, you'll learn that there's afferent and efferent nerves that control sensory input and motor output. And then the autonomic nervous system is the involuntary stuff, so it works without you having to think about it. So you can think about it as a behind the scenes process. So all the like basic functions that keep you alive. So it comprises of the sympathetic nervous system, which activates body processes that helps you in times of need. And this includes times of stress or danger. And so this is known as the fight or flight response. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. So it's more of a rest and digest body process. And then finally, there's the enteric nervous system. And this is mostly responsible for digestion of food.
Next, it's types of neurons. So there are three types of neurons: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and internal neurons. So sensory neurons, these neurons are like the body's sensors. They direct changes in the environment and send information to the brain and spinal cord. And for example, if you touch something hot, the sensory neurons detects the heat and sends that message to your spinal cord. Next is motor neurons. These neurons are responsible for moving your muscles or activating glands. So once your brain or spinal cord has received the message, the motor neurons send a command to the muscles to react. So after the sensory neuron detects heat, the motor neurons tells your hand to pull away from the stove or the hot surface. Finally, we have interneurons, and these neurons are like the middleman. They connect sensory and motor neurons inside the brain and spinal cord. So when the sensory neurons detect the heat, the interneuron quickly processes this information and decides how your body should respond, and then sends the message to the motor neurons to act. And by the time your brain knows what happens, your hand has already moved away. So basically, these neurons like protect you, and by making sure your body reacts to like how your body reacts to danger and how it processes inside your brain.
All right, next we're going to go over the structure of a neuron. So the structure of a neuron includes dendrites, which are these little brown branched things. They receive and process signals. The cell body, which is in the middle, it includes essential organelles like the nucleus. The axon, which is the main long part, is where action potential is conducted. Covering the axon is the myelin sheath, which is a fatty insulating layer that allows for faster electrical impulses. It's similar to on a wire, how you have insulation around the outside. Schwann cells are glial cells that produce myelin in specifically the peripheral nervous system. There's little gaps in the myelin sheath. Those are nodes of Ranviers, and they pretty much allow ions to move in and out. And lastly, at the end is the axon terminal, which sends the signal that has been conducted to other neurons.
Okay, next is the neural communication. So there's two main parts to neural communication, which is the intraneuronal, and the other one is the interneuronal. So interneuronal refers to inside one neuron, whereas interneuronal refers to between two neurons. So within intraneuronal, the main like concept is action potential. So it first starts off at resting, which is at negative 70 millivolts, right? There would be more sodium ions, which are positively charged outside of the neuron, whereas inside would have more potassium charge, potassium negatively charged. Then the concentration gradient leads to the sodium moving into the cell through sodium channels, which is the stimulus and depolarization part. And this is assuming that it reaches the all or nothing threshold, right? So the all or nothing threshold refers to if the charge reaches negative 55 millivolts. If it's negative 54 or lower, it wouldn't work and it would be called a failed initiation. If it reaches negative 55, then it will for sure like trigger. And then after a while, this causes the potassium channels to also open up, but it ends up letting out too many potassiums, which is the repolarization and hyperpolarization part. And basically, it needs the sodium potassium pump to restore it back to negative 70 millivolts, which is the resting state. Now for interneuronal, there's the synaptic gap. So voltage gated calcium ions would open, and which leads to calcium ions entering the presynaptic cleft. And this basically pulls the vesicles that hold the neurotransmitters towards the presynaptic membrane. And when the vesicle gets really close, the vesicle's membrane fuses with the presynaptic membrane, and the neurotransmitter contents spill out into the synaptic cleft and binds into specific receptors, opening ion channels. And these ions are then led into the next neuron until the voltage meets the next threshold, which again triggers action potential.
Okay, so here are the types of neurotransmitters. The first one is dopamine, which makes us feel pleasure and motivated. The second one is serotonin, which controls our mood and sleep, and it makes us feel happy and calm. The third one is norepinephrine, which boosts our energy and focus, especially when we're like stressed or excited. The fourth one is GABA. It's like it calms us down and reduces anxiety. And the fifth one is glutamate, which excites the brain and helps us learn new things. The sixth one is acetylcholine, which helps with muscle movement and also memory. The seventh one is endorphins, which acts like natural painkillers and makes us feel good, like after exercising or like, yeah.
So the structure of the brain. So the brain is divided into two hemispheres, the left and the right. The left hemisphere controls language processing, logical thinking, and the motor control of the right side of the body. The right hemisphere controls creativity, emotional processing, spatial ability, and motor control of the left side of the body. Now let's move on to the three major regions of the brain. The forebrain includes the cerebrum, thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The cerebrum is responsible for memory, voluntary movements, and higher level thinking. The thalamus acts as a relay station, sending sensory signals to the right parts of the brain. The hypothalamus helps regulate emotions, body temperature, hunger, and thirst. The midbrain mainly controls eye movements and processes both visual and auditory information. The hindbrain includes the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Cerebellum manages voluntary movement, balance, and coordination. The pons help regulate unconscious functions such as breathing and sleeping. And finally, the medulla oblongata controls essential automatically functions such as heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing.
Okay, so the first part of the brain is the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is the largest lobe in the human brain, and it's located directly behind the forehead. And what it does is in charge of voluntary movement, expressing your language, managing higher level of executive functions such as cognitive skills like planning, decision making, organizing, and it's also a control center for behavior and personality. If there's damage to the frontal lobe, it can cause behavior change, unable to express your language, paralysis, being unable to move certain parts of your body, mood swings, and many more.
And next we'll cover the occipital lobe. Its function is to receive and interpret visual information through the retinas of the eyes. Its role in the body is to make a meaningful image out of visual signals. And it's located in the back of the brain. So maybe later on, if you take a neuroscience class, you'll learn that the eyes are up front, and then there's optic nerves, optic tracts, and optic radiations that lead all the way to the back. So there's a lot of processing that goes on throughout the brain, and then it culminates in the occipital lobe where it's processed and it produces an image. So if this region is affected or damaged, people can experience partial or total blindness and have trouble with recognizing objects, colors, and movements. And a fun fact is that this lobe is the smallest out of the four lobes.
Now we have the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is one of the four lobes of our brain. It's located behind the frontal lobe and above the temporal lobe. It plays an important role in processing sensory information. Its main function is receiving and interpreting sensory information such as touch, temperature, pain, sight, smell, taste, and hearing. If damaged, you may experience difficulty with spatial reasoning, have a hard time controlling your emotions, and have a reduced ability to one or more of your senses. A fun fact is it's the only lobe that can perceive the position of your body in space, meaning it allows you to know where your different body parts are and how they move.
Next, we have the temporal lobe. The function is used for auditory processes, memory forming, language understanding, and a bunch more of memory functions, such as recalling memories. Brain body is used for the ability to sense the world around them. For example, understand people while they're talking, or remembering where your food is at. Location is in the lower side of the brain, on both sides of the brain. If affected, you lose the ability to speak and recall or restore memories. And fun fact, is the second largest lobe.
Okay, so here's some extra information on the prefrontal cortex. And as I said before, it's located behind the forehead and it's located in the frontal lobe. And the key functions are going to be executing functions like planning or decision making or problem solving or even self-control. And it includes other things as well. And then we have our memory and the languages that we speak and the emotions that we show or feel, and then our intelligence. The structure of the prefrontal cortex is going to be first the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and then this works the memory and the cognitive control. And the second part is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is involved in our emotional processing and our decision-making skills. And our excuse my pronunciation, orbitofrontal cortex is involved in our decision-making and our emotional regulation. And lastly, our social behavior. So they all work together, but they give us like different results. And then, yeah. A fun fact is that the prefrontal cortex only develops, or the frontal lobe only develops when you're like 25 years old. So for most of us, it's still not even developed.
All right, the motor cortex is the frontal lobe of your brain, so right in front of the groove called the central sulcus. Okay, about like where you'd put your headband across your forehead and on top of your head. So let's discuss the main parts. So the primary motor cortex sends signals to your muscles and make them move. So when it helps send those messages to your muscles, it's like those little signals that they send, and it makes your body move, your muscles move, right? Like if you wave your hand across the hall to your friend, that's your motor cortex telling you to do that. And then your premotor cortex helps your brain plan movements, especially when you react to things around you, like catching a flying football. It helps you plan and prepare your movements, especially when you're reacting to something like catching the football when you see it flying towards you. And then the supplementary motor area. There's supposed to be a picture on the top right, I believe, but it's not there. So that part, it helps you with the movements and it helps you decide on yourself and connect them together. And those connecting movements are like when you play basketball, you gotta like practice these movements, like a smooth jump shot, connecting the movements into one flow. All right. So the importance of the motor cortex is, it controls our movements. It's easy to see why it's so important. Without it, even simple things like walking and talking and writing, or even smiling would be really hard or impossible. It's the part of your brain that turns your thoughts into actions.
All right. Now, moving on to the somatosensory cortex. So basically, it has the main responsibility of processing sensory information that's located in the cerebral cortex and the parietal lobe of the brain. So this cortex actually works with the thalamus to process accurate information. So, for example, temperature change, such as being very cold, would send a signal to thalamus, where it would then relay that to the somatosensory cortex to process and signal the brain to send out commands, such as like um, putting on a coat or moving somewhere else to prevent further damage to the body. And this is very important to our perception of pain because it's basically a cortex that's telling you, like, oh, you're in danger, you need to get away from whatever is causing you any pain. And so, as you can see in these diagrams over here, there are distinct parts of the cortex that handle sensory inputs from different parts of the brain. So, for example, if something touches your thigh, the information will report to that top portion of the cortex, as you can see at that bottom diagram over there.
Yeah, and that's all we have for you today. And I also wanted to share, sorry, there's actually a name for this term, that Nicole was explaining. It's called a homunculus. So basically, like your fingertips are more sensitive than your like upper arm, and your toes are more sensitive than like things that are more core. So then wait, maybe I can look it up. But basically, if you make like a figure. It's like this. So if the size corresponds to like your perception, your hands and your face are really big and everything in the middle is like really small. I thought that was kind of cool. They teach that in every neuroscience class. And then also, sorry, I put this in the chat, but I wanted to clarify a point made earlier. I think one of our interns said that the prefrontal cortex isn't developed. So basically, we all have prefrontal cortexes, but it's just not fully developed until we're about 25 years old. So as an example, this could justify like people in their early 20s having reckless behaviors like getting drunk and doing things that aren't maybe mature. But yeah, sorry for any confusion of that. And then also I think these concepts are super difficult, particularly the neural communication. This actually took me like more than a year to understand. So shout out to whoever did this slide. This is really straightforward. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer. It took me so long to understand this concept. I just could not understand all the ions that were involved and then like what causes it to go up and go down. So yeah, good job explaining that. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to send out form to gauge interest in a summer session, depending on people's summer plans. And if some people might have summer programs that they're part of, and then we'll go from there. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this semester and wish you good luck on finals, AP exams, graduation, anything that's taking place in May. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. If not, feel free to leave. And then thank you for joining us this semester.